Do you recall two females in here?
Yes, I do recall two females.
Okay.
I refuse to talk about this.
It started as an ordinary night in a brightly lit restaurant, the kind of place people go to feel safe, casual, and unnoticed. Families eat here. Friends talk freely. No one expects danger between menus and coffee refills. But sometimes, the most unsettling stories don't begin in the dark. They begin in plain sight. A routine dinner slowly shifted into something uncomfortable, then disturbing, then impossible to ignore. What began as awkward behavior escalated into allegations serious enough to bring law enforcement rushing through the doors. By the time deputies arrived, the atmosphere inside had changed completely. Confusion hung in the air. Voices clashed. One person refused to speak. Another insisted boundaries had been crossed. And somewhere between what was said and what was denied, the night spiraled beyond control. This is not a story about a violent crime in an alley, or a secret hidden for years. This is about how quickly normal can fracture, and how a single interaction can unravel into police reports, arrests, and unanswered questions. Because when the truth is disputed, when silence replaces explanation, and when alcohol, authority, and accusations collide, what really matters is what can be proven, and what happens next will decide everything. The call came in just after 8 p.m. Deputies were dispatched to a familiar location in St. Petersburg, Florida, an international house of pancakes, a place better known for late-night breakfasts than police investigations. The caller was not an employee, not a manager, but a customer who said the experience inside had crossed a line. According to the report, two women had entered the restaurant simply to eat. Nothing about the moment suggested it would end with flashing lights in the parking lot. But almost immediately after being seated, the tone of the interaction began to feel wrong. The waitress assigned to their table, later identified as 26-year-old May Wright, allegedly used sexually explicit language from the beginning. Not jokes, not awkward humor. Explicit comments that made the customers uncomfortable. The situation escalated when the waitress reportedly sat down inside their booth without invitation. What followed, according to the customers, was unwanted physical contact. They claimed the waitress touched their backs and arms while making further inappropriate remarks. When the women asked for their check, the encounter allegedly took an even darker turn. They told deputies the waitress said the bill would be covered by the cook, adding that he was in the back waiting for them to come have sex with him. That was the breaking point. The customers left the booth and called law enforcement. When deputies arrived, the restaurant was still open. Other patrons were present. The lights were on. Nothing outwardly suggested a crime scene. But as soon as the deputy made contact with the waitress, she noticed something concerning. There was a strong odor of alcohol on her breath. The deputy asked basic questions: who she was, whether she was working that night, and what had happened with the customers who made the complaint. May confirmed she was the waitress on duty. She admitted she had talked with customers throughout the day and acknowledged sitting in booths with people. But when asked about the specific allegations, her demeanor shifted. She became guarded, defensive. She refused to explain what happened. The deputy tried again, explaining that a complaint had been made and she was simply trying to understand both sides of the story. May responded vaguely at first, then invoked her right to stop answering questions altogether. She did provide identification, but little else. As the conversation continued, tensions inside the restaurant grew. A cook working that night stepped forward, clearly frustrated but trying to calm the situation. He told deputies it was a slow shift, only 2 employees working, and that May had been talking with customers earlier. He insisted everything seemed friendly. He claimed people were laughing. No arguments, no visible distress. But then he added something important. He said her behavior that night was unusual. He told deputies she was acting kind of odd, calling him daddy, licking her lips at him, and behaving in a way he hadn't seen before. He admitted she might have been intoxicated when she arrived for the shift, despite not being scheduled to work that day. He also said he had told her she should not be sitting with customers, explaining it was against restaurant rules. While the cook denied making sexual propositions or offering to pay customers' bills, he admitted he wasn't present at the table during the entire interaction. At times, he said, he was in the kitchen or outside smoking. That gap mattered, because the customer's account painted a very different picture. They told deputies the touching was real. The comments were sexual. And the experience left them uncomfortable enough to call police from a restaurant where they expected to feel safe. With May refusing to answer further questions, deputies were left with limited options. As one deputy explained, investigations rely on hearing all sides. But when one side chooses silence, officers must proceed with the information available. At that point, deputies decided to end Ali May's shift early. They asked her to step outside. What happened next unfolded quickly. As deputies attempted to escort her away from the restaurant floor, Ali May's attitude escalated. She questioned why she was being detained. She challenged the officers repeatedly. She raised her voice. The situation became confrontational. Moments later, deputies informed her she was being placed under arrest. The charge: misdemeanor battery. She was instructed to face the door. She was searched for weapons. She was handcuffed. The night ended not with plates being cleared, but with an arrest report being written. Ali May Wright was taken to the county jail. According to later court checks, there appear to be no records indicating the case was ever prosecuted, suggesting the charge may not have moved forward. But the incident itself left behind unanswered questions. Was this a case of alcohol-fueled behavior spiraling out of control? A misunderstanding amplified by discomfort and perception? Inside that IHOP, there were no cameras focused on the booth. No recordings of the words spoken. Only statements, denials, and silence. And sometimes, that silence is what makes a case linger. By the time Ali May Wright was escorted out of the restaurant, the focus of the investigation shifted from what was said inside the booth to what could be established through witness accounts and officer observations. Deputies separated everyone involved. One officer remained with the customers who made the complaint, documenting their statements in detail. The other deputy stayed with Ali May, who continued to challenge why police were involved and why she was being detained. Throughout the interaction, officers noted her repeated refusal to discuss the allegations. According to the offense report, Ali May questioned the legality of the stop multiple times, asking what crime she was being accused of and why she was required to provide identification. Deputies explained more than once that they were investigating a complaint involving inappropriate comments and unwanted physical contact. They also clarified something important. At that stage, she was not being interrogated. She was not being questioned as a suspect in custody. They were attempting to understand her side of the story. Despite that explanation, Ali May remained uncooperative. Officers later wrote that her tone was confrontational and dismissive, and that she appeared irritated by the presence of law enforcement, rather than concerned about the accusations. They again noted the strong odor of alcohol coming from her breath and her inconsistent demeanor. Inside the restaurant, the cook continued speaking with deputies. He reiterated that he never invited customers to the back, never offered to pay their bill, and never suggested sexual activity. He emphasized that the women were older and said he had no interest in them, adding bluntly that he would not have made such an offer. However, he also admitted something that complicated his defense of Ali May. He acknowledged that when he saw her sitting with customers, he immediately told her to stop. He said employees had been fired in the past for that exact behavior. According to him, she brushed it off and continued interacting with them. He described Ali May as someone who joked aggressively and used crude language regularly, but said he had never before seen her behave that way toward customers. Deputies also contacted the restaurant's manager by phone. The manager told officers that Ali May had worked there for about 6 months without prior issues or complaints. However, she was not originally scheduled to work that day. She had picked up the shift unexpectedly. That detail raised additional concerns. If Ali May had been drinking earlier in the day, it could explain why her behavior appeared different than usual. But it did not explain the allegations of physical contact, and that distinction mattered. From a legal standpoint, intoxication does not excuse battery. From an investigative standpoint, it can explain why behavior changed, but not whether it crossed a criminal line. After her arrest, deputies transported Ali May Wright to the Pinellas County Jail. She was booked on a misdemeanor charge of battery. Officers documented that she did not appear injured and did not claim any use of force beyond standard handcuffing. The customers were informed of the arrest and advised on how to follow up if charges proceeded. In the days that followed, public records were checked. No additional charges appeared. No court hearings were listed. No prosecution records surfaced. That silence suggests the case may not have advanced beyond the arrest stage, possibly due to evidentiary limitations, witness availability, or prosecutorial discretion. And that is where this story becomes less about certainty and more about complexity. Cases like this rarely offer clean endings. There were no surveillance cameras capturing the booth interaction, No audio recordings of the alleged comments. No third-party witnesses seated close enough to confirm what was said or done. What remained were two conflicting narratives. One side described explicit language, unwanted touching, and behavior that made them feel unsafe. The other side denied wrongdoing, minimized the interaction, and refused to engage with investigators. Law enforcement was left to make a judgment call in real time, based on statements, observations, and credibility. That judgment resulted in an arrest, but not necessarily a conviction. And that gap matters. Because arrests are decisions made in the moment, prosecutions require proof that can withstand scrutiny later. Whether the allegations were exaggerated, misunderstood, or fully accurate is something the legal record may never clearly answer. What is documented, however, is how quickly a situation escalated once boundaries were perceived to be crossed. A casual workplace, alcohol present, unprofessional behavior, refusal to cooperate. Those elements combined into a scenario that law enforcement could not ignore. For the customers, the experience was unsettling enough to call police. For the waitress, the night ended in handcuffs. For the restaurant, it was a reminder of how fragile public trust can be. And for investigators, it was another example of how truth is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's fragmented, disputed, and incomplete. What remains is a case that technically ended quietly, but leaves behind an uncomfortable reality. Not every incident has a clear villain, not every arrest leads to a courtroom, and not every truth is fully resolved. As the night settled after the arrest, what lingered was not resolution, but uncertainty. Once May Wright was taken to the county jail, deputies returned to their reports. They documented everything: the customer's statements, the cook's account, the manager's phone call, and their own observations inside the restaurant. Every detail mattered, because without video or audio evidence from the booth itself, the case depended heavily on credibility. According to the customers, the experience was not a misunderstanding. They described behavior that felt deliberate and invasive. The language, they said, was sexually explicit from the start. The physical contact was not brief or accidental. It was repeated, unwanted, and uncomfortable enough to push them from confusion into fear. They were clear on one point: they did not invite the waitress into their booth. From their perspective, the power imbalance mattered. Calling police felt like the only way to stop the situation and document what had happened. For deputies, those details carried weight. At the same time, the defense narrative, though never formally presented in court, was already visible through witness statements. The cook insisted there was no sexual proposition involving him. He denied any agreement to cover the bill. He claimed laughter, not distress, had filled the booth when he glanced over. But he also admitted he wasn't there the entire time. That absence created a gap no one could fill. The manager's statement further complicated things. She said May had never been a problem employee. No prior complaints, no disciplinary issues. But she also confirmed May was not scheduled that day and had picked up the shift unexpectedly. That detail raised questions no report could fully answer. Had May been drinking earlier? Was she impaired when she arrived? Did alcohol lower her inhibitions enough to blur professional boundaries? Deputies noted the strong smell of alcohol multiple times. They documented her confrontational tone. They described her refusal to answer questions, not as an admission of guilt, but as a barrier to clarification. Legally, she had the right to remain silent. Practically, that silence left officers with only one side of the story. And that is often how arrests happen. Not because guilt is proven, but because risk cannot be ignored. Battery, under the law, does not require severe injury. Unwanted touching alone can meet the threshold if intent and contact are established. In this case, deputies believed the allegations met that standard enough to justify an arrest. But arrest is only the first step. Prosecution is another matter entirely. In the days and weeks that followed, the case appeared to stall. No formal charges moved forward in court records. No hearings were scheduled. No plea, no trial, no sentencing. That absence suggests one of several possibilities. The prosecutor may have determined the evidence was insufficient to meet the burden of proof. Without video, audio, or neutral witnesses, the case may have come down to conflicting statements, something juries often struggle with. It's also possible the complaining parties chose not to pursue the case further. Reliving an uncomfortable experience in court can feel more burdensome than walking away, especially when outcomes are uncertain. Or the case may have been resolved quietly through administrative or informal channels, leaving no public trail. Whatever the reason, the lack of prosecution does not erase what happened that night. It only underscores how messy reality can be. For the customers, The experience likely reshaped how safe they felt in a space meant to be casual and welcoming. For Ali May, the arrest itself, regardless of court outcome, became a permanent mark in police records. For the restaurant, it was a reminder that a single shift can undo months of normalcy. And for law enforcement, it was another example of how quickly situations involving alcohol, authority, and personal boundaries can spiral beyond control. This case never offered a clean ending. There was no courtroom verdict to declare truth, no sentence to signal closure, no final ruling to settle every question. Instead, it exists in the grey area where many real-life incidents remain, documented, disputed, and unresolved. What stands out most is how ordinary the setting was. Not a nightclub, not a bar at closing time, not a place where chaos is expected. A family restaurant, early evening, bright lights. And yet, that didn't prevent discomfort from turning into allegations, or allegations from turning into an arrest. Sometimes, the most unsettling stories are not the ones with dramatic conclusions, but the ones that end quietly, leaving everyone involved to carry their own version of the truth. And that quiet is where the story still lives. The restaurant returned to normal long before the night truly ended. Tables were wiped down, chairs were pushed back into place. Coffee was poured for new customers who had no idea what had happened just an hour earlier. To anyone walking in afterward, it looked like another ordinary evening at a familiar place. But for the people involved, nothing about that night was ordinary anymore. For the customers who made the call, the decision to involve police was not impulsive. It was the result of feeling trapped in a situation that escalated too fast to manage on their own. What began as discomfort turned into fear, not because of a single moment, but because boundaries kept being crossed after they were silently rejected. They did what many people hesitate to do. They documented it. They reported it. They asked for help. For law enforcement, the response was procedural but cautious. Deputies did not arrive assuming guilt. They asked questions. They separated stories. They observed behavior. They listened for consistency. And they paid attention to what could not be ignored: refusal to cooperate, signs of intoxication, and a workplace environment already on edge. The arrest was not a conclusion. It was a pause. A moment where responsibility shifted from the scene to the system. And yet, as days passed and no court proceedings followed, the case quietly faded from public view. No trial transcripts, no plea hearings, no sentencing updates. The legal record remained thin, almost unfinished. That absence doesn't mean nothing happened. It means this story belongs to a category many people don't talk about: the cases that sit in between certainty and dismissal, where something clearly went wrong, but proving exactly what crossed the legal threshold becomes difficult once the moment has passed. Alcohol complicates memory, silence complicates truth, and public spaces complicate accountability. From the waitress's perspective, the arrest alone carried consequences. Even without prosecution, being taken into custody is not invisible. It follows you. In records, in background checks, in quiet explanations you're forced to give later. For the restaurant, the incident likely triggered internal reviews, conversations about scheduling, supervision, and alcohol policies. Changes that rarely make headlines but ripple through workplaces long after police leave. And for the customers, the impact is harder to measure. Public spaces rely on an unspoken agreement of safety. When that agreement feels broken, even briefly, it changes how people move through the world, where they sit, how they speak up, whether they trust that discomfort will be taken seriously. This case did not end with a verdict. It ended with questions. Questions about professionalism, questions about intoxication in the workplace, questions about how much evidence is enough when boundaries are crossed without witnesses. And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all: how many moments like this end without documentation, without calls, without reports, because people decide it's easier to walk away than to challenge what made them uncomfortable? Not every story resolves cleanly. Not every incident fits neatly into the justice system, but that does not make them meaningless. Sometimes, the value of telling a story lies not in the outcome, but in the awareness it creates. Because safety is not just about crime scenes and convictions. It's about recognizing when normal begins to feel wrong, and knowing that speaking up matters, even when answers are incomplete. If stories like this make you pause, if you believe the details matter, even when the ending isn't perfect, like this video. Share it with someone who cares about real stories, not just headlines. And subscribe for more, because the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits to be heard.